5 years ago, this very evening, Jeremy Corbyn led the Labour Party to 40% of the vote, 13 million votes, and the greatest rise in the Labour share of the vote since Clement Attlee's post-Second World War victory in 1945. It was a truly stunning, phenomenal result. But for 2,227 votes cast in the right constituencies, Jeremy Corbyn would have become the Prime Minister of Great Britain in 2015. In 2017. It was a stunning result to the Blairites that had spent the previous 2 years undermining him. It was a stunning result for them, captured on television as they saw the exit poll show that Corbyn had not actually driven Labour onto the rocks, but had scored one of the all-time historic Labour results. You could see the tears metaphorically rolling down their cheeks. You could tell by the length of their faces how their hopes had been dashed. And it later transpired, and the Ford report, still unpublished, is supposed to be bringing history, the evidence of that a fifth column inside the Labour headquarters, as well as inside the Labour parliamentary ranks, as well as the Labour membership outside on the National Executive Committee and others, had ensured that Corbyn fell short by 2,227 votes of becoming Prime Minister. Just get your head around that. It was the Labour Party itself which stopped a Labour Prime Minister from coming to power. A Labour Prime Minister that had rocked and rolled the length and breadth of the country, packing stadiums, bringing thousands of people out into politics for the first time. Those who were close to Corbyn's campaign described the truly phenomenal situation of crowds on trains, on train stations, in streets, waving from buses. The popular uprising that was represented by Corbyn's almost prime ministership was something we have not seen in Labour in the country since 1945. Get your head around the fact that it was the fifth column inside his own shadow cabinet which had done so much to destroy the possibility of their leader becoming the Prime Minister of Britain. They preferred a Conservative victory 5 years ago to a Labour victory under their own leader, Jeremy Corbyn. They had been stabbing him in the back since the day and hour that he had become the leader. They had challenged him for the leadership, and Corbyn foolishly tolerated their continued presence in the Parliamentary Labour Party, even in his own shadow cabinet, and 2 years later, in 2019, would fall from grace and power and out of the Labour Party altogether as a result of the triumph of the fifth column over the Brexit policy in particular. It was Keir Starmer and John McDonnell and Diane Abbott and Emily Thornberry and the other Blairites in the front ranks of the Labour Party that put a noose around Jeremy Corbyn's neck and ended his leadership and probably the possibility of Labour ever winning a parliamentary majority was hanged that day. I start with this because it's an auspicious date, 5 years on, what might have been, but also to counterpoint the very same fifth columnists who are today's main wringers of hands, renderers of clothes, gnashers of teeth, wailers of wailing about the Boris Johnson that they themselves did more than anyone else in the country to put into power. It is one of the great ironies which they imagine none of us recognize, that those who did most to enable, to facilitate the triumph of Boris Johnson over Jeremy Corbyn are the people who now claim to be most horrified by the Boris Johnson premiership, the Conservative government that they themselves made not just possible, but inevitable by the kamikaze U-turns they forced Corbyn to make. And he went along with it, don't get me wrong. He's not a friend of mine. Once upon a time, he was a close friend and comrade of mine. He's not even a friend of mine now. But I cannot, of course, stay silent while history is rewritten. And I cannot forgive the betrayal of the interests of the British people that happened 5 years ago this day. Because if Corbyn had won power in 2015, there would have been no Theresa May government, there would have been no Boris Johnson government, and the foreign and domestic policies of Britain might have been substantially different. Of course, there could have been a very British coup. Corbyn could have been killed, kidnapped, toppled in one way or another. His own parliamentary party might have let down his tires so that he couldn't drive to the palace to kiss hands with Her Majesty the Queen. Of course, Corbyn could have capitulated on key policies in 2017 if he'd won, like he did before the election in 2019. Of course, Corbyn could have betrayed me and Chris Williamson and many thousands of others who had been close to him and had supported him wholeheartedly in all of the years and decades that he had been a figure on the left. All of that might have happened. All of that could have happened. Much of it may very well have happened. But politics in Britain today would be a very different place if Corbyn had got that 2,227 votes. Just imagine that number. That's how close Corbyn was to becoming Prime Minister. And if he hadn't been stabbed in the back for the 2 years previous, he might well have done it. But he didn't, and we are where we are. But I will never remain silent about those that have betrayed the British people. And preeminent amongst those right now is Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's destruction of the Labour Party in 2019 over the Brexit U-turn, the so-called second vote fiasco, and in his leadership of the Labour Party, having expelled effectively Corbyn from the Labour Party, having broken all of the things, all 10 of the pledges that he made in order to become leader, having concealed key, important financial information about who was backing his leadership campaign, having sold his soul completely to the apartheid state of Israel and the Zionist movement in Britain and in Israel, having betrayed the workers on strike, the workers crying out for leadership and assistance in the cost of living crisis through which the working class is now passing. Starmer rambles, a rootless liberal, through the green labyrinth of identity politics, taking the knee, claiming that women can have penises, and all the other meaningless shibboleths of his section of what claims to be still the left of politics, but is instead just another cheek to the arse that is British politics. A right cheek, a left cheek, with the Liberal Democrats in between. We have become a one-party state. Labour isn't Labour, the Conservatives aren't Conservative, and the last thing the Liberals are is Democrats. We have effectively a one-party state where the parties can be changed, but the policies never can. And those of us who reject that kind of politics are branded, shadow banned, banned altogether, expelled, censored, or subject to somebody called Paul Mason. Now, Paul Mason attacked me today in a graph that he drew, a crazed, unhinged, febrile graph that he drew to send to someone to try and inveigle the British security services and the Conservative government's Department of Media, Culture and Sport, and the Conservative government's appointed Ofcom regulator into a witch hunt of the Grayzone project and named individuals in his graph. I'm mentioned quite centrally in his graph, so his learned friends will forgive me answering in kind. It's called fair comment, Paul. Look it up. It's a defense in any defamation action. Here's my fair comment. I have known Paul Mason since he was a crazed, unhinged Trotskyite from a group called Workers' Fight, which was chiefly distinguished by not having any workers in it and never actually putting up any fight. It was a weird clique, a weird sect, a small cult in a thicket of sects and cults. It was out there, far out on the edge of the forest of the 57 varieties of Trotskyism in Britain. Now, there were some good people in it. A fellow called Lee Rock springs to mind in Sheffield, a genuine class fighter. I'm not blaming him or them for Paul Mason. As a matter of fact, I'm beginning to wonder if he'd infiltrated them as he later infiltrated the Corbynites themselves. I'm wondering if he was always frenziedly seeking to inveigle himself in the British security state. I'm wondering if this graph is the only graph he's ever written to be passed to the British security state. I'm wondering if these reports that are unveiled by the Grayzone are the only reports that he's ever written. I'm wondering if he has been a plant in the Labour movement all along. That's what I'm wondering, because how does a man go from being a Trotskyite in a frenzy to a man caught in writing, seeking to turn the British state's security services and presumably the security services of the United States against a left-wing news outfit, all in the name of a crazed anti-Russianism? You see, for Mason, everyone who's not with him is with Putin. And he's ready to name and inveigle in his plots people and organizations that thought they were his friends. Novara Media, for example, a milk and water luxury communism outfit that fucks like a champion by their own words. that actually has nothing whatsoever to do with Russia, with Putin, or Fiona Edwards, a wonderful young woman, a credit to the Labour Party and the Labour movement, MPs like Zara Sultana and others, inoffensive, never met a Russian, never met Putin, yet they're smeared in the same graft as me and others by Paul Mason in the documents revealed today. At least we had to wait till Orwell was dead before we discovered that he'd been ratting on his friends, reporting them to MI5 and MI6, sending reports about his own friends' conversations after dinner parties and lunches in Soho. At least Orwell was spared the ignominy of his treachery being revealed whilst still alive. I wouldn't like to be Paul Mason this evening, because the revelations in the Grayzone today leave him a husk, a burnt out husk, incinerated by the calibers of truth, Paul, burned to a smoking ruin, unable ever to show his face, his so-called left face at least, in British politics ever again. You need a heart of stone not to laugh. Paul Mason's service to the British state in the British Labour movement came to an end today. Sing hallelujah, at least I am. Boris Johnson had a hell of a week. He won, in inverted commas, the vote of no confidence held in the Parliamentary Conservative Party. But he only won it by a narrow margin, and he had more votes against him than either Theresa May or John Major, incomparable votes of confidence. And look what happened to both of them. Theresa May was out within 6 months of having fewer enemies in her own party than Boris Johnson has today. John Major went on to lead the Conservatives into the 1997 election and lost by a landslide. And that's what the Tories have now to contemplate. Do they cling to nurse for fear of something worse, imagining that Boris might be another John Major? Or do they decide to have the courage of the convictions, at least of some of them, to get rid of him somehow by a votes strike, by constant low-level, maybe mid-level parliamentary guerrilla tactics? Do they vote against him in a motion of no confidence if Labour or the Liberal Democrats have got the guts, which they presently don't, to table one? There are many slips between cup and lip for Boris Johnson and many elephant traps ahead. It looks like the Conservatives will lose heavily both of the parliamentary by-elections later this month that are pending. There are other inquiries and reports which will try and keep the ludicrous Partygate fiasco in front of the public, in front of the membership of the Conservative Party. But here's their problem. His enemies have no candidate. and his enemies could never agree on a program. You see, despite all the hysterical guff that Boris Johnson is somehow far right, that his cabinet is somehow the most right-wing government that we've ever had, in fact, the opposite is the truth. Boris Johnson is spending public money like a drunken sailor. He's taxing and spending more lavishly than any Labour Chancellor would dare to do. He's as green and as liberal as any of the others in the green labyrinth of British politics. In fact, far from being far right, Boris Johnson isn't even a conservative at all. Neither in his morals or in his behavior or his drinking and drugging habits, his sexual looseness, his attitude to his own families and even other people's families, his attitude to all moral questions throughout all of his life from Eton and Oxford onwards. There's nothing conservative about Boris Johnson. He has no real affinity for or attachment to the mass of the British people. He's as foreign and alien to the mass of the people as anyone whose real name is Alexander Boris de Pifeful Johnson even suggests that he might be. He's an exotic peacock of a man, not the type of fellow that you would expect to be running the Conservative Party. He'd pick your pocket. He'd pick your wife. He'd pick your daughter. And he maybe even already has. So the Conservative Party has no real love of Boris Johnson. Some of them are Brexiteers. Many of them are still Remainers. Some of them are even rejoiners. Some of them don't want a big tax and spend government. Some of them still believe in the Thatcher monetarist philosophy. Others are Labour defectors, several of them in red wall seats, who are dependent on the votes of small c Conservative working class Brexit supporters at the next general election, not the fancy dans from the salons in London frequented by Boris Johnson and his circle, not the clubs, the Bullingdon boys and girls. No, they have nothing in common with the traditional base of the British Conservative Party. So he may hang on. And then if he does, we'll face the choice between Tweedledee and Tweedledum, a choice between two cheeks of the same arse, with the Liberal Democrats in between. This is what I mean by Britain becoming a one-party state. I made the observation on Twitter earlier this evening that in Britain you can change the party, but you can't change the policies because they all believe in the same thing. In China, you can't change the party, but you can change the policies. As anyone who studied China from Chairman Mao through Deng Xiaoping and the Chinese capitalist economic miracle over these last decades, which is the democracy in that picture? You may say neither. You may say that it's Hobson's choice. Maybe. But at least the policies in China are working. The policies in Britain are not. Let me turn to what I called the cost of living crisis through which we are living. The fact that it isn't the main story in the media doesn't mean that it isn't happening. Our petrol, our diesel will very shortly, perhaps within weeks, be £2 a litre, climbing inexorably towards £10 a gallon. Unaffordable for millions of British drivers who, whether the green labyrinth likes it or not, are still the vast majority of us. Believe it or not, winter will be here again soon. In just 15, 16 weeks from now, we'll be turning on our heating, but we won't be able to afford to do so. There may be power cuts, there may be shortages of power, but for sure, there will be people who have to choose between heating and eating. Eating from a rapidly depleting food supply at a rapidly escalating set of prices. In parenthesis, I mentioned China. Let me therefore mention Russia. The price of petrol, diesel in Russia is £1.27 per gallon. They've got plenty of oil, plenty of gas, record production of wheat, and their other raw materials. Their business is building like Billy-O, as our business, thanks to our political leaders, is headed for the tank. I tell you that there may not be a long hot summer because the British people and the American people are slow to act politically. But there is going to be a bitterly cold winter, and I'm not sure that the British political system, discredited, disabled, dysfunctional, is in any position to handle the rising anger that there will be in the country. For there is no love for them. No one acts out of love for the British Conservatives, the British Labour, or the British Liberal Democrats. No one. No one acts out of love for Joe Biden, for the Democrats in the United States. Some may say that they're the lesser of two evils, or this cheek of the arse is slightly more comely than that cheek of the arse, but nobody loves any of them. Nobody trusts any of them. Nobody believes that any of them have got the answers to the real material crises that are mounting in Western countries, that are now structural, built in, baked in, and cannot be altered without radical, dramatic political change. The only weapon in the armory of our establishment, it appears, is to censor those who say otherwise. Censor those who cry the danger of havoc. Censor those who wish to leash the dogs of war. Censor them. Not let them eat cake. Let them not be seen or heard. But that will not work, because we are being seen. We are being heard. My mother of all talk shows on a Sunday night at 7 p.m. on all the platforms still left to me is attracting 1 million viewers a week, all or in part, on multiple platforms. This show, made for nothing by me and my wife and my pal Simon in Manchester, for nothing, had last week 250,000 views. A no budget, one camera television show on a Wednesday night at 10 p.m. UK time. 250,000 viewers. Again, all or in part, again, over all platforms. Who knows what this week's audience will be? If it keeps rising at this rate, it'll soon have the audience that the mother of all talk shows has on a Sunday. That's why I'm hoping. I can't look at the screen because I'm looking at the camera, but I'm hoping these orange flashes I'm seeing going up are donations to our fighting fund so that we can bring back the midweek MOATS that we have lost, so that we can bring back the mother of all talk shows midweek, the mother of all talk shows podcast, so that we can double our output and double our audience and double the consciousness. That's why I'm on Paul Mason's graft. Not because of my political views, which are the same now as they were when I first met him, and he was several leagues to the left of me. It's him that's moved, not me. My politics are exactly as they were. That's why I'm on his graph. Not because of my political views, which are steady, constant as the northern star, but because people are listening to me. People are watching me. People are searching me out. And my guests, we had a professor, Steve Hankey, a senior economics professor from Johns Hopkins University in the United States, on our show last Sunday. Listen to his wisdom if you have not already. It's the fact that I'm bringing guests like him in front of 1 million people a week. Richard Medhurst, so many other outstanding guests, attracting a wider and wider audience across the Anglosphere. Paul Mason has no answer to Professor Steve Hankey. He can only seek to close him down, to deplatform shows like mine, to defund us. That'll be a problem because our funds come from you. They have no answer beyond censorship and exile, internal exile, or if they can achieve it, external exile. But none of that will work, for they have no answers. As Mason concedes in the leaked emails published by the Grayzone today, a left anti-imperialism, he says, will grow and grow because the liberals have no answer to it. He's correct about that. And no amount of conspiracy with the British security services, the intel, the white labels, no conspiracy with Ofcom or the Department of Culture, Media and Sport under Nadine Dorries. You couldn't make it up. Paul Mason and Nadine Dorries, hand in glove, trying to close Max Blumenthal and me and people like us down. They have no answer. And therefore, people will go on searching for answers. And if it takes them more time and more effort to find them, they surely will. For this is 2022, not 2002, still less 1982. You can't close down those tribunes of an alternative point of view that continue to cry out against what's wrong and cry out that which we believe to be right. I've spoken for too long. I suspect, let me take questions, Gayatri, from anyone trying to get through. £5 from BAMXIRE. Thank you very much indeed. George, no one within Westminster could lace your boots, good sir. Through thick and thin, you speak with courage and with conviction. Love from Ireland. God bless Ireland and all in it, and all Irish people around the globe, one of whom, on my mother's side, I am myself. Bolofindo Me gives 55.10 in a currency MYR. I don't know what that currency is, but it looks mighty impressive. Thank you very much. George, do you think the West will escalate tension further in Taiwan soon? And what should the peace lovers do? It's from Malaysia. Thank you. God bless Malaysia. Well, they are stuck in the Ukraine. It has begun to go disastrously wrong for them. They know that Russia and China are as close as two countries could possibly be, and closer than they have ever been, at least since 1953. These two countries are a mighty powerhouse, economic and political, and in terms of population and soft power around the world. The Belt and Road Initiative, Russia's lesson that it is teaching NATO right now in Ukraine. So it would be a bold American that would try anything in Taiwan right now. Actually, they'll be pretty lucky if China doesn't make a move in Taiwan instead of the United States doing so, on the principle that when your enemy is bogged down somewhere else entirely, that might be regarded in Beijing as a good time to accelerate the reunification of their country. After all, everyone believes there's only one China. Everyone believes that Taiwan is a part of China, not just the government in Beijing. The British government believes it. The American government believes it. 99.9% of the governments of the world believe it. The United Nations believes it. So if China is one country, if Taiwan is but a province of China, it's high time it was reunited, isn't it? Let's see if there are any more. PN gives £4.99. Georgia's revolution is here to stay. Thank you very much. God willing. It's our 10-year anniversary, me and Gayatri. Today we're spending it with you. It was cheaper than taking her out for a meal. Engineer Langat says, we are fond of your wisdom, from Kenya. Thank you kindly for that in Kenya. Is there an election coming up in Kenya? Let me know, someone. Big Basil says, I like Corbyn until he started going against his own ideals. Well, I'm sure that he would say he didn't go against his own ideals. I'm more on your side of that than on his, but I'm sure he still believes in much the same things. The problem was that he thought that by conceding, by a process of appeasement, I don't like to use that word, appeasement, that he could disarm his enemies. But you know, you can't disarm a tiger claw by claw. You have to kill it right between the eyes. And he didn't do that. If I'd been there, if I'd been close to him, if I'd been at his right hand, that's certainly what I would have counseled. Indeed, I'd have done it for him. But he turned his back on me. He betrayed me personally, just like he betrayed Chris Williamson and many others. And he did so, I'm sure, because he thought it was the politic thing to do, but it's never a good look, and it seldom is successful to throw your comrades under a bus, hoping that you'll be able to avoid the bus yourself in the end. Gorgonzola, good old friend, gives $5. Thank you. Steve Sweeney was just interviewed by Vanessa Beeley about some adventures he recently had in Lvov, packed full of NZs, Nazis, I think that is. He said it was. Have him on. Well, Steve is a comrade of mine. He appeared with me at our Victory Day celebration. You can see that on YouTube. A very, very fine man and a very, very fine speech he made on that occasion. I'm very much hoping to welcome him into the Workers' Party, which I have the honor of leading. Joseph Stalin gives £5. Thank you, Comrade Galloway, for exposing Paul Mason, the Trotskyist wrecker. Well, I've always thought that Trotskyites were wreckers and saboteurs. I just never imagined they'd be foolish enough to write it down on a graph and in email form. Andre gives £17.99. God bless you, Andre. Happy anniversary, George. What do you think the end game is in Ukraine? The trap was set. How do we find a peaceful settlement? Well, I think we're past a peaceful settlement now, Andre. I think that was available up to the negotiations in Turkey. The war didn't need to start at all if the Minsk II agreements that the regime in Kiev had signed had been implemented, if the guarantor powers, France and Germany, had forced Ukraine to live up to that which they had signed, there wouldn't have been a war at all. Of course, once a war begins, then the price of ending it escalates. It doesn't go down. So I hold to my prediction. I'm not party pre. I have no insight into the thinking of either government involved, but I have been around a long time. I know about military matters and I know about politics. So I cling to my view, which has been publicly expressed for weeks now, that there will be two Ukraines at the end of this, an East Ukraine and a West Ukraine. And the river Dnieper will be the border between the two. And that will leave the Western Ukraine prey to Polish and Hungarian ambitions. I don't have time to adumbrate them all now, but it would leave them prey to becoming a kind of Kosovo, a NATO protectorate, an EU protectorate, though I don't believe the EU will give them membership. But NATO would be hard-pressed to refuse them membership. And so NATO, just like in Kosovo, will pay all the bills. Poland and Hungary might nibble away at territories they believe in that are theirs. Zelensky would be overthrown. Probably a very far-right government would come to power in Kiev. Kiev would, the Western Ukraine would be landlocked. It would be bereft of industrial and agricultural resources. It would be a burden forever, just like Kosovo on NATO. Careful what you wish for, you Western fools in chanceries and palaces throughout the Western world. Rachel Thompson says, truth is the enemy of a corrupted state. Indeed, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. James Morrison gives CA dollars 100. That's Canadian dollars 100. James, thanks. God bless you for that. And I have fond memories of my time in Canada. I toured much of Canada, right up to Yellowknife in the Arctic Circle. Not many people could say they've given a speech on a frozen lake, the Great Slave Lake in Yellowknife in Canada, but I can. Chris Turner, my good friend, the Bolshevik beekeeper, gives £50. God bless you, Chris. Your generosity never ceases to amaze me. And David Greenwood says, I hate Starmer more than Johnson, if at all possible. He is the worst kind of traitor and the most boring man in British politics. David, I agree with every word and syllable in your message. He makes a Dalek look eloquent, sound eloquent. Keith Hayes says, the US desperately wants China to respond to constant aggravation. They won't. China's a very, very patient country, and their leadership is extremely patient. But that doesn't mean that when the right time to act comes, that they will fail to act. Tony Hughes says, Boris Johnson is more than a con man. He is the fuel for the American war machine in the UK. Quite so. He's gung-ho for war more than Biden even. As Cameron and Sarkozy were gung-ho for the invasion of Libya, even more than Obama was. No, hell mend him, Boris Johnson. I wish him only perdition. Not because I think he's worse than Starmer. I'm with the last caller. I think Starmer's worse than him. I'm merely pointing out just how bad a situation you're in when the choice is Boris Johnson or Keith Starmer or Beer Corma or whatever his name is. Let's see. Tony Hughes says Corbyn was the last hope for Labour. Now they are just Conservatives under a different cloak. That's right. I mean, Corbyn brought them back from the dead. They were on life support when Corbyn became the leader. And look what he achieved. Despite everything going on behind him, 40% of the vote, 13 million votes, the biggest lift in the Labour vote since 1945, and coming within 2,227 votes of becoming Prime Minister. My God, they should have been throwing flowers in his path instead of sticking knives in his back. Pesky Quiet Man says it ain't left or right, it's socialist or sociopath. It's right or wrong for me. I believe in common sense socialism, and I believe my policies and the policies of the Workers' Party are common sense politics. They go with the brain and the grain of British people. Of all kinds, by the way. People who regard themselves as conservative, people who regard themselves as Labour, can see the common sense kernel and grain within the politics that I stand for. Let's see. Gorgonzola's back. Midweek Galloway Show gets me through to the weekend. Thanks for that. It does. I mean, this is good, but it would be good to have guests. It would be good to have callers, wouldn't it? It would be good to have two cameras. It would be good to be in a studio instead of in the back room of my house. And that's what we can get back to. We had it for a time and the audience was enormous. The audience of the midweek Mother of All Talk Shows was not far short of the long established Sunday night Mother of All Talk Shows. And the podcast, which we also had to ditch, was breaking records everywhere in countries all over the world. But yeah, it's a substitute. And I go on at 11 o'clock. I repair to my Patreon page to talk to my patrons, kick off my shoes, or slippers, actually, and relax a bit. For those who want to continue the show, that's patreon.com/George Galloway. You can join me there and get lots and lots of other content, including my George's Best Football podcast, which I happen to think is amongst the best work I've ever done. Marky Mark says, I've met hundreds of Ukrainians over the years, and they've all been lovely. Are we in danger of overstating the number and influence of the far right over there? Well, Mark, you could look at the public realm. You could look at the big boulevards called after Nazis. You could look at the statues springing up everywhere. You could look at the tens of thousands of actual Nazis that are in the armed forces, part of the official Ukrainian army. You could look at the Einsatzgruppen documentary on Netflix, which I've been encouraging people to watch. Einsatzgruppen, Hitler's death squads. and you'll see the longevity of the deep fascist element component within Ukrainian society. But of course, there are many, many, many fine Ukrainians. Ukrainian parties that are now banned by Zelensky. Ukrainian politicians that are now imprisoned by Zelensky. People that have been driven out of the country by Zelensky. There are many, many, many fine Ukrainians in the eastern part of the country, the kind of people that fought Hitler rather than not just collaborated with Hitler, but acted as members of the SS itself and the Einsatzgruppen, mass murderers of Jews and others in the Second World War in what's called the Eastern Holocaust. Check out that documentary, Mark, and come back and tell me if you feel the same. Wind Waves gives $100. God bless you. Please continue to give us hope. It's shocking how humanly correct you are on all subject matters. Well, thank you for that. I was wrong once in 1978, I think. I'm only joking. Of course, I can be wrong. The difference is I'll tell you when I am. I was wrong when I believed with absolute sincerity that Russia would not invade Ukraine. I was wrong about that, and that's only 100 days ago. I'm just someone that does their best. I'm undereducated. I've taught myself and been taught by some great men and women that were my seniors in the labor movement growing up. I left school early. I went to work in a factory. I was a trade unionist. As Van Morrison puts it, I'm a working man in my prime. At least that's what my wife says. Now, Claude Me says, if left alone, I have no doubt that Taiwan will gradually and peacefully integrate with mainland China. But then what wedge will America have to bait China into war? I agree with that, Claude. I think that is China's preferred policy by a long chalk, by a country mile. But they will not allow Taiwan to be built up as a threat to China. They will not allow Taiwanese independence. Why should they? Most countries in the world wouldn't allow a part of their country to declare independence. Certainly the United States would not. They'd fight a civil war to avoid it. Oh, wait, they already did so. Tommy Wright says, Gerald Calente quote, the business of America is war. The business of China is business. I think that's right, Tommy. I watched rather belatedly, and it's kind of out of date in some important respects, John Pilger's epic documentary, The Coming War with China, which is now on Netflix, which is how I came upon it. It is a magnificent piece of work. I didn't agree with everything in it, but it is a magnificent depiction of the total transformation of China over the last 40 years. Unbelievable transformation. 800 million people lifted out of poverty in 40 years. 800 million from poverty to the standard of life that they have today. It's a truly phenomenal achievement. And there's some wise voices, Chinese voices, in the documentary. John prods them a bit, provokes them even, but they rise to the occasion. Let's see, I've got 5 minutes. Luis Betancourt says, congrats on your anniversary, Mr. Galloway. Thank you, Luis. God bless you. Much obliged. Ernest Gibson gives $5. Alabama and the Palestinians. Excellent, Ernest. Alabama. Ma, I'm talking with Alabama. They're sending me $5 the same day I made it at the top of the heap, right in the center of Paul Mason's witch hunting, McCarthyite smear chart. Thanks for that. Any more, Gayatri? Let me see. Yeah, can you join me if you're in the northeast of England or the southeast of Scotland or anywhere within striking distance of Newcastle, a magnificent city, with people who are amongst the very best of British. I'll be there at the Copthorne Hotel on the 27th of June. That's a Monday night, showing my film, Killing Kelly. You won't be in much doubt by the end of the movie about what really happened to Dr. David Kelly. And then I'll take your Q&A and sign books and whatever other chat you want to have. We'll have a good session in the Copthorne Hotel on the 27th of June. So a couple of weeks from now, get your tickets from ticketsource.co.uk/KillingKelly. Let me see any other messages. I've still got 3 minutes, I think. Keith Hayes gives $10 from Tennessee. Wow, how wonderful is that, Tennessee? I've always loved that name, Tennessee. Tennessee Williams, the great state of Tennessee, sending $10 to the Galloway Show. Thank you. Screw Google says this show is being broadcast from George's home. MOATS is done in a professional studio. The content of his show is of the most important. We don't need overproduced content. We need truth above all. Well, that's true, of course, and I'm grateful to you for watching this relatively low quality broadcast. My point is, I can't have any guests. I can't have callers. If you listen to the caliber of the callers we get on a Sunday night, that adds to the sum of the knowledge of all of us, me included, in the Open University of the Airwaves. Wouldn't that be good to get back to that? Wouldn't it be good to talk to a guest from the Middle East, a guest from Iran, a guest from America, a guest from Russia, from the United Nations in New York? Wouldn't that be good? Wouldn't that be better than just me talking for an entire hour? I'm glad that you listened to me for an hour, but it's not ideal. Vladimir Sutnovsky gives Australian dollars, I think, 20. Thank you, Vladimir. God bless you for that donation. Are you in shorts under the table? No, but I am in my slippers. That's the only thing I can say. But I'm fully dressed from the waist up in my broadcasting clothes and wearing jeans on the bottom half. Mark gives £20. Thanks, I'll watch those things you suggested. Anyone who can quote Cleaning Windows by Van the Man can't be without heart. Van the Man. Sir Van the Man, I may say. I'm a working man in my prime. It's one of my favorite quotes, not just from Van Morrison, but of all time. Thanks, Mark, for that. Now you can head over to Patreon of a Mind, patreon.com/George Galloway. I thank you very much for donating, for watching, for listening. Hope you'll spread the word. And I very much hope you'll join me on Sunday night at 7 p.m. London time for the mother of all talk shows. Good night and God bless.